Now welcome to our today's lesson. These are a continuation of what we were covering in the morning. So in this particular lesson, we are going to discuss how we can solve quadratic equations using factorization technique. Now, in our previous lesson, we looked at how we can factorize a situation where we have a difference of two squares. So just to remind ourselves, let us consider these three cases. We want to solve the quadratic equations, but a case where we have a difference of two squares. Remember, in our previous lesson, I did mention that a difference of two squares in the form a squared minus b squared is equal to 0. So this refers to as a difference of two squares. So when we have such a situation, then the factors becomes a plus b, a minus b, that is the product of open bracket a plus b close, then open bracket a minus b close is equal to 0. So at this level, we can now use the null factor law to work out the first linear factor and also solve the second linear factor. So at this point, we say a plus b will be equal to 0 or a minus b is equal to 0. So suppose we have a case which is not very direct in this form. Like in Roman part 1, that we are calling it Roman 1, we have 8x squared is equal to 72. So class will discover that that particular question is not exactly in the form a squared minus b squared is equal to 0. So the first step is to express 8x squared is equal to 72 in the form a squared minus b squared is equal to 0. So we are saying we express in the form a squared minus b squared is equal to 0. That will enable us to work out a difference of two squares. So in this case, the constant term 72 is on the right hand side, so we need to write it in the form so the constant term must be collected on the left hand side so that we only remain with a 0 on the right hand side. To achieve that, we subtract 72 from both sides since it's positive. So on the right hand side, we shall have 72 minus 72, which gives us a 0. Then on the left hand side, we have 8x squared minus 72. So then when we compare, we find that actually it's not a difference of two squares because you cannot get the square root of 8. We don't have exact square root of 72. It's not an integral value, and also a square root of 8 is not an integral value. So what we do, we try again to factor out common factor. So we study the equation and find out what is common. So in this case, what is the common factor between 8 and 72? Now, you discover that the common factor here is 8. So we divide both sides by 8. So if we divide each term by 8, or both sides by 8, we shall have So here, 8x squared divided by 8. The 8 cancels. We are left with x squared. 72 divided by 8. We have 9. Then 0 divided by 8 is 0. So at this point, the equation is in the form ax squared minus b squared is equal to 0. We can even go further and express 9. If we express 9, we discover that it is 3 squared. So our equation is x squared minus 3 squared is equal to 0. So it's in the form a squared minus b squared is equal to 0, where a is x, b here is 3. If we substitute, then I did mention that a squared minus b squared is equal to 0 can be expressed as in factor form a plus b into a minus b is equal to 0. And we have identified our a is x and our b is 3. So if we substitute correctly, we discover that where there is a, we put there x. Where there is b, we put there positive 3. Where there is a, we put there x. Where there is b, we put there 3. Then at this point, we have two linear factors. We can be able to find the value of x by using the null factor law. Using the null factor law, it means the first linear factor, x plus 3 is equal to 0, or the second linear factor, x minus 3 is equal to 0. So what is the value of x for the first linear factor? So the value of x for the first linear factor will be, we subtract 3 on both sides because we have x plus 3. That means the constant term is positive. So to eliminate it on the left-hand side, we subtract. So we shall say x plus 3 minus 3 is equal to 0 minus 3. So the value of x is equal to minus 3 because 0 minus 3 is minus 3. Okay, taking the second linear factor, x minus 3 is equal to 0, we can be able to find the value of x by adding 3 on both sides. Why do we add? We add because the constant term is negative 3. And therefore, to eliminate it on the left-hand side, we add. So x minus 3 plus 3, we remain with x. Then on the right-hand side, 0 plus 3, we have 3. So that means the solution to the first equation, quadratic equation, is x is equal to minus 3 or x is equal to 3. That is the solution for that case. Let us look at the solution for Roman 2. Class, try out. X minus 2 squared minus 9 is equal to 0. How do you solve for the value of x? Now, to find the value of x in this case, we need to compare with the difference of two squares. A squared minus b squared is equal to 0, since the first term is being squared and we have a constant term. So we can be able to express this constant term What is the square root of 9? The square root of 9 is 3. So that means if we take 3 and we square, we shall get 9. So we express it in that form. So this particular equation is now in the form a squared minus b squared is equal to 0, and therefore is a difference of two squares where a is a is x minus 2 and b is 3 in this case. So we now substitute where there is a, because we know that a squared minus b squared is equal to 0 is equivalent to a plus b plus a minus b plus is equal to 0. So where there is a, we put there x minus 2. So in this case, we have x minus 2 squared minus 9, which has been expressed as 3 squared is equal to 0. So that implies that where there is a, we put there x minus 2 because this is our first term. Then where there is b, we replace with 3. We substitute with 3. Close the bracket. Then the second bracket is a minus b. And the a in our case is x minus 2. Then b is 3. So it will be x minus 2 minus 3 is equal to 0. So at this point, we now simplify the first bracket. Minus 2 plus 3 is 1, so we have plus 1. Then minus 2 minus 3 is minus 5. So at this point, we have two linear factors. We can be able to use the null factor law to find the value of x. So that means x plus 1 is equal to 0, or x minus 5 is equal to 0. So at this point, we can be able to get the value of x. Because it's positive 1, we subtract 1 from both sides. So if we subtract 1 from both sides, we are having x plus 1 minus 1 is equal to 0 minus 1. So the result will be x is equal to minus 1. Now, taking the second linear factor, x minus 5 is equal to 0, because the value of the constant term is minus 5, we add 5 so that we eliminate it on the left-hand side to make x the subject. So we shall have x minus 5 plus 5 is equal to 0 plus 5. So on the left-hand side, we shall have x. Then on the right-hand side, we shall have 5. because 0 plus 5 is 5. And therefore, the solution to part 2 will be x is equal to minus 1 or x is equal to 5. So solve this quadratic equation, class. 3 minus 7x squared is equal to 100. Now, in this case, we are supposed to arrange this particular equation in the form a squared minus b squared is equal to 0. So you might realize that the constant term is on the right-hand side. So we need to collect it to the left-hand side. Because it's positive 100, what do we do? To express in the form a squared minus b squared is equal to 0, we subtract 100 from both sides. So we are having 3 minus 7x squared is equal to 100 minus 0. So at this point, we can be able to express 100 as 10 raised to power 2. So in this way, it means we are expressing the form a squared minus b squared is equal to 0. So we can be able to identify a. A in our case is 3 minus 7x. B in our case is 10. From the knowledge of a difference of two squares, we said if a squared minus b squared is equal to 0, then the factors are so if a squared minus b squared is equal to 0, then we have these two linear factors, a plus b into a minus b is equal to 0. So we have said a is 3 minus 7x. So where there is a, we substitute with 3 minus 7x. So our factors become 3 minus 7x, that's a, and b is plus 10 into major bracket 3 minus 7x minus b is 10 is equal to 0. At this point, we now collect the like terms. So the like terms here are 3 and 10. So we shall have 3 plus 10 is 13, then minus 7x is there, Then in the second bracket, we have 3 minus 10 is 7, which is minus 7. So we shall have minus 7x. Then 3 minus 10 is minus 7. So at this point, we have two linear factors. So the first linear factor is minus 7x plus 13 is equal to 0, or the second linear factor is minus 7x minus 7 is equal to 0. We have used the null factor law to write down those particular linear factors. So at this point, we find the value of x from the first linear factor. To find the value of x, we first of all subtract 13 from both sides so that we only remain with a value having x on the left hand side. So it will be minus 7x plus 13 minus 13. So on the left, we remain with negative 7x. Then on the right, we have 0 minus 13, which is minus 13. So at this point, divide both sides by minus 7 to remain with x. So minus 7 and minus 7 cancels. We remain with x. Then minus minus cancels, becomes positive, and therefore we have 13 over 7 as our value. Picking the second linear factor, that is minus 7x minus 7 is equal to 0. Find the value of x. To find the value of x, we collect minus 7 on the right hand side, so that we only remain with a term having x. So in this case, because it's negative 7, we add 7 on both sides. If we add 7 on both sides, on the left we shall have minus 7x minus 7 plus 7 is equal to 0 plus 7. So on the left hand side we shall remain with minus 7 is equal to 0 plus 7 is 7. So at that point, how do you find the value of x? To find the value of x, we divide both sides by negative 7, which is the coefficient of x. So negative 7 divided by negative 7, we have 1. So we have x equals to 7 divided by negative 7 is negative 1. Because positive divided by negative is a negative. So that means we have two values of x. So either x is equal to 13 over 7 or x is equal to negative 1. So that's basically how we can solve quadratic equation using the knowledge of the difference of two squares. Now, we want to extend the knowledge of solving quadratic equation, but in this case, in solving quadratic trinomials. When we talk about quadratic trinomials, we are looking at a quadratic equation in the form ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. So it's a trinomial because it has three terms. We have the quadratic term, the linear term, and the constant term, and therefore it's called a trinomial. So in the first case, we shall consider a situation where a is equal to 1. That means monoquadratic equations. We call them monic quadratics. So when the coefficient of x squared is 1, we call that a monic quadratic. For example, e.g., now, in this particular case where the coefficient of x squared is 1, you are required to solve the quadratic equation, Roman 1, x squared minus 8x plus 6 is equal to 0, and Roman 2, x squared is equal to x plus 6. So how do you solve this? To solve this quadratic equation, the first step is to express in the form ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. When you study this Roman 1, it's already in the form ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0, which is the standard form of a quadratic equation. Now to solve this, the first thing, we identify a. What is a in this case? A is the coefficient of x squared. That is coefficient of the quadratic term. In this case is 1. B is the coefficient of the linear term. In this case is the coefficient of x. And it's negative 8. What is the constant term in our equation? The constant term, c, in our equation is 6. So we look for two numbers such that the product will be equivalent to a times c. In our case, a is 1 and c is the constant term, which is 6. So we look for two numbers. When you multiply, you get 6. But when you add, On adding, we are supposed to get b, in our case, is -8. We look for those numbers by inspection method. We also call it trial and error, inspection or trial and error. So if we use trial and error, we start by multiplication. What are the factors that will give you 6? Factors of 6 that will add up to -8. So we list all the factors. We have the first one is 1 times 6. Another one is 2 times 3. But when you look at the sum, it must give you 6. So it means for the product to be positive, the two numbers must be both positive or both negative. So we only consider positive numbers that give 6 or negative numbers that give 6. So from that list, the first one is 1 times 6. Those factors can give the result to be 6. The product is 6. If the product of 2 and 3 is also 6. The product of -1 and -6 is also 6. The product of -2 and -3 is 6. That is the first condition. The product is 6. But now we consider the second condition. When you add the two factors, we are supposed to get -8. So that means the first two factors cannot work. We eliminate. Is not true. The second one is not, because both of them are positives. When you add, you don't get -8. When we reach at the third factor, which is -1 and -6, if you add, if we add, we again don't get, sorry, it's 16, not 6. So we need to correct this. The equation is x squared minus 8x plus 16 is equal to 0. So the product is a times c, and a is 1, c is 16, so we need to correct that. So when you multiply, we get 16. The sum is -8. So what we do, we are going to start by listing factors that when you multiply, you get -16. Our equation is x squared minus 8x plus 16 is 0. So the first one is 1 times 16. You get 16. The second one is 2 times 8. We get 16. The other one, 4 times 4, we get 16. But because our result is positive, the product is positive, it means the two numbers must be positive, or the two factors must both be positive or both negative. So let us consider a list of negative factors. So here we have 1 times 16 is 16, 2 times 8 is 16, 4 times 4 is 16. But when you add them, you don't get 8. So this one is not. They are not the required factors. The next, we have negative 1 times negative 16 is 16. But when you add negative 1 plus negative 16 gives you negative 17, which is not true as per our rule here. We are supposed to get negative 8. Negative 2 plus negative 8 is not 16, is not negative 8 because it gives you negative 10. So again, this is not. We now remain with one last factor. Negative 4 times negative 4 is 16. And when you add the two factors, negative 4 and negative 4, the result is negative 8. And therefore, the factors are the factors of 16 are negative 4 and negative 4, and the sum is negative 8. So we use the two factors, negative 4 and negative 4, to split the middle term, which is the linear term. So how do we split? It means the linear term is negative 8x, which can be split as negative 4x minus 4x. So instead of writing negative 8x, we split using the two factors we have identified by inspection method. So it will be x squared minus 4x plus 16 is equal to 0. So at this point, we now do a factorization by pairing. So we pair like that. So what is common between the first term and the second? You will notice that between x squared and negative 4x, x is common, and therefore we factorize. X squared divided by x is x, minus 4x divided by x is minus 4. Then negative 4x plus 16, what is common is negative 4. Minus 4x divided by negative 4 is x. 16 divided by negative 4 is negative 4, which gives you 0. So at this point, we write the repeated factor, which is x minus 4. Then followed by the other factor, x minus 4 is equal to 0. So at this level, we now use the null factor law. That is, we said if a times b is equal to 0, using the null factor law, we said either a is 0 or b is 0. So in this case, the first linear factor, x minus 4 is equal to 0, or the second linear factor, x minus 4 is equal to 0. So it means To find the value of x, because it's x minus 4 is equal to 0, we add 4 on both sides. So we shall have x is equal to 4. The other one, x will be equal to 4. So these are repeated factor, x is equal to 4. So the quadratic equation is giving us only one factor, x is equal to 4, which is repeated. That is how we solve the quadratic equation, which are called monic quadratics, where the coefficient of x squared is 1. Now, let us move on to another case. I'm calling it case 3. We now solve a quadratic equation where the coefficient of x squared is any other number than 1. So, quadratic equations where the coefficient of x squared is any other number other than 1, they are called non-monic quadratics. So you can say, in this case, so in this case, the coefficient of x squared is other than 1. Is any other value than 1. Is any other value than 1. Is any other value than 1. So let us look at an example. Okay, now we want to consider case 3, that is a case where the coefficient of x squared is any other value than 1. For example, solve these quadratic equations. In part A, we have 5x squared plus 16x plus 3 is equal to 0. And in part B, we have 3x squared plus 4x minus 4 is equal to 0. Using factorization technique. Using factorization technique. So you can add there. So we want to use factorization technique. So how do we do it? So try out part A. So looking at this particular question, part A is a trinomial because it has 3 terms. It is non-monic quadratic because the coefficient of A is 5. That means it's not 1. So the first thing you do is to confirm whether it's in the form ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. That is the standard form of a quadratic equation. If it's not in that form, then you rearrange so that it is in the form. In our case, it's in the form ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. What is a? Coefficient of x squared. So in our case, a is 5. What is b, class? B is coefficient of x, which is 16. What is c? The c in our case is the constant term 3. Having done that, we now get the factors of the product of A and C, which is A is 5 and C is 3. That gives us 15. So we shall look at the factors. By inspection method, the factors of 15. Then, when you add the factors, the two factors, we are supposed to get B. So sum means adding. Sum should give us B, which is 16. So the sum should give us B. So once we have that, we shall be able to split this middle term. So let us start with step 1. Identify the factors that gives us 15, whose product is 15. So the two factors can be found by inspection. We can find the factors by inspection or trial and error. So by inspection method, we list down all the factors of 15. Three times 5 is 15. Another factor, class? We have 1 times 15. We have 3 times 5. So both of the factors are positive. We can also consider, because our result, the sum, when you add, you are supposed to get a negative value. It means we can also consider a negative factor and a positive factor. But if we consider a negative factor and a positive factor, the product will not be positive. So for product to be positive, it means both factors must be positive or both must be negative. So here, in our first case, both are positive. But if we consider both negative, what happens? The sum cannot be a positive if we consider the negative ones. Let us see. If we consider -1 and -15, we get +15. Negative 3 and negative 5, we get positive 15. But what happens when you add the two factors? When you add negative 1 and negative 15, the result is negative 16. And therefore, it will not satisfy the condition of summation to be 16. So this one is not. The other one, negative 3 and negative 5 as a factor is not, because when you add negative 3 and negative 5, the result is negative 8. So again, not. Let us confirm both positive case. So that one we don't consider. When they both are positive, sum. Let us see the sum. So when you take when we take 1 plus 15, the result is 16. When you take 3 plus 5, the result is 8. So from the checking the sum, we discover that only the first factor satisfies, but the second one does not. And therefore, we say factors are 1x and 15x. So instead of 1x, we can as well write it as x. In this case, 1 is implied. So we now split the middle term using the two factors. We now split the middle term, which is 16x, using the two factors. In this case, we have discovered that 1x plus 15x gives us 16x. So instead of 16x, we express using 1x and 15x so that we have 4 terms. Because you can only factorize when you have an even number of terms. That is, either there are 2 terms, or 4 terms, or 6 terms. But the question has only 3 terms. That's why it's called trinomial. There is need for us to make the number of terms to be 4 by splitting this linear term. So if we split the middle term, we have 5x squared plus x plus 15x plus 3 is equal to 0. Then at this point, you factorize by grouping. That is, we group the first pair, that is, first 2 terms, 5x squared plus x. What is common? So between 5x squared plus x, I believe you have discovered that x is common factor. So we factorize by putting it outside the bracket. Then 5x squared divided by x, we have x cancels, we remain with 5x. x divided by x is 1. Then between 15x and 3, what is the common factor? The common factor is 3. 15x divided by 3 is 5. X. 3 divided by 3 is 1, which is 0. We write the repeated factor, which is in our case 5x plus 1, followed by the other factor, which is x plus 3, which gives us a 0. At this point, we use the null factor law to find the value of x using the first linear factor. So this implies (5x plus 1 is equal to 0) or x plus 3 is equal to 0. So if we solve the first linear factor, what will be the value of x? To find the value of x, subtract 1 from both sides. On the left-hand side, we have 5x plus 1 minus 1, which leaves us with 5x is equal to 0 minus 1 is minus 1. So at this point, how do you get the value of x? To find the value of x, you divide both sides by 5. So 5 divided by 5, we remain with 1x, which is x. Then minus 1 divided by 5 is minus 1 over 5. Minus 1 over 5. That's the first value of x. Or, if we pick the second linear factor, x plus 3 is equal to 0, we can be able to find the value of x by subtracting 3 from both sides. X plus 3 minus 3, we remain with x, so we have made x the subject. 0 minus 3, we remain with negative 3. So, we conclude by saying that solution to the quadratic equation 5x squared plus 16x plus 3 is equal to 0 is x is equal to negative 1 over 5 or x is equal to negative 3. That is how we solve. Class, let us now look at more example on the same as part B. Now class, solve this quadratic equation 3x squared plus 4x minus 4 is equal to 0. Now, as I mentioned, the first thing we do is to express in the form ax squared plus b. We express in the form ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. So at this point, our equation is already in that form. So we just pick the values. What is a? Now, looking at our question, the coefficient of x squared is 3, so a is 3. Coefficient of x is 4, so b is 4. The constant term is negative 4, so c is negative 4. From there, we now get the product. The product of the two numbers, a and c, will be 3 times negative 4 and 3 times negative 4 is negative 12. Then the sum of the two numbers should be equivalent to b, which is the coefficient of x, in our case is 4. Now, how do we find the two numbers, the two factors whose product is negative 12? So the factors of negative 12 are found by inspection method. So it's inspection or trial and error. So we use the product part. Which two factors, which two numbers, when you multiply, you get negative 12. So we come up with a list of all the factors, starting with the smallest, like 1, multiplied by 12. In this case, it means one factor must be negative and the other one should be positive for us to get a negative 12. So let us suppose we assign negative 1, a negative to 1. So we shall have negative 1 times 12 is negative 12. And if we interchange and assign a negative on 12, we shall have 1 times negative 12. Another one we can choose is 2. Is negative 2 times 6, also gives us 12. Class, which are the other factor? We can have another factor where we interchange the sign, where 2 is positive and 6 is negative. Which is the other factor? We can have 3, which is negative 3 and 4. And lastly, we can have 3 and 4 as negative. The next thing is to identify a pair which when you sum, you get 4. So if you take sum, negative 1 and 12 is 11. 1 plus negative 12 is negative 11. Negative 2 plus 6 is 4. 2 plus negative 6 is negative 4, because 2 minus 6 is negative 4. Negative 3 plus 4 is positive 1. 3 plus negative 4 is negative 1. So out of that list, we identify a pair which is giving us the sum as 4. And again, just by observing or by inspection, we find that a pair which gives us sum to be 4 is that. So we are going to use negative 2 and plus 6. So We say the factors of negative 12 is negative 2 and 6, where the sum is 4. So we split the middle term for x using the two factors we have identified as negative 2. So it will be negative 2x, and the other one is positive 6x. So we have split the middle term. We go ahead and rewrite the quadratic equation, that is 3x squared plus 4x minus 4 is equal to 0. So the first quadratic term is 3x squared. Instead of 4x, we now rewrite using the factors negative 2x, then plus 6x is equal to 0. So we shall have 3x squared minus 2x plus 6x minus 4 is equal to 0. We now do factorization by grouping. That is, we pair the first two factors and the first two terms and the last two terms. So that means we pair like that. We pair like that. Plus, identify what is common between the first term, that is 3x squared, and minus 2x. Between 3x squared and minus 2x, x is common. We factor out. Then take 3x squared divided by x. Three x squared divided by x is the same as so x and x cancels, we remain with 3x. Negative 2x divided by x. X cancels, we remain with negative 2. Then between 6x and 4, what is common? The common factor is positive 2. 6x divided by 2, 2 into 6 is 3, so we have 3x. Negative 4 divided by 2, 2 into 4 is 2, negative 2, which is equal to 0. So at that point, we write the repeated factor. What is the repeated factor in this case? The repeated factor is 3x minus 2. And the other factor is x plus 2. Remember, you must move with the sign that is there, is equal to 0. This implies that using the null factor law, the first linear factor, 3x minus 2 will be equal to 0, or the second linear factor, x plus 2 is equal to 0. Suppose we pick the first linear factor. What will be the value of x? To find the value of x, we add 2 on both sides since it's negative to eliminate it from the left-hand side. So we shall have 2x is equal to 3x is equal to 2. What is the value of x? To get the value of x, you divide by 3 on both sides. So x will be 2 over 3. Then finally, we find the value of x for this second linear factor, x plus 2 is equal to 0. So we subtract 2 from both sides. On the left-hand side, we shall have x is equal to 0 minus 2 is minus 2. And therefore, the solution to this quadratic equation 3x squared plus 4x minus 4 is equal to 0 is x is equal to 2 over 3 or x is equal to minus 2. So in summary, we have learned how to solve quadratic equation using factorization technique where you have coefficient of x squared 1, and in the last case we have looked at a situation where the coefficient of x squared is a number which is greater than 1. We stop at that point until we meet next time. Thank you.